Okay, so today we are making sourdough.
Jolly good.
There are lots of versions of this on the internet, but this is a fairly simple one. So yeah, we start with a nice large mixing bowl, and I just put that on the scales, zero it, and the first thing we need is our starter mix, which has been prepared over the last extended period of time, and we need 500 grams of this. So you just pour this in until we get to 500 grams. And that's pretty much it. And just try and tidy it up a little bit as you go, so you don't have it too much sticking on the outside of your jar or whatever you're keeping it in. Eventually this gets a bit scuzzy and you'll need to clean it up, but that will do for now. I'll crack with it there, I'll just get rid of. So to your 500 grams of starter, you add 275 grams of water, and I find the easiest way to measure 275 mils of water, but I find the easiest way is to just measure 275 grams. So, and I've warmed this up previously in the microwave, about 600 mils in here, and I've put it in the microwave for a minute just to warm it up. 275, close enough. And so that goes into the starter. Too much of that. And just mix that a little bit.
I normally help at this point, but you're flying solo.
Yep, and we'll put that back on the scales and re-zero it and get a nice clean dry towel into this clean dry cup, and we add 550 grams of high-grade white flour. The recipe originally called for 500 grams, but I find that 550 makes it a little bit firmer and a bit easier to work with. I gather that if you use wholemeal flour you don't need as much. So that's 550 grams, and then we mix that up. Make sure you get all the wet stuff off the bottom and all the dry stuff off the sides, and it doesn't need to be too precise.
And this is this making a, what do they call it, slurry?
Well, there's a guy on the YouTube who describes this as a shaggy mass, which I think is probably quite a good term for it. You can see it's kind of shaggy looking. You just want, no soggy bits and no floury bits, and that's basically all it needs. You just scrape that off, and then the only other thing you have to do at this stage is to refeed your starter. This can go away, and we'll just cover that. I use these waxy cloths. They're quite useful, but damp tea towel, something like that. Bit of Glad wrap, and that can just go somewhere quiet to wait for half an hour. So we for the starter, we've taken out 500 grams of there, so we need to replace it with 500 grams of flour and water. I actually do it slightly more. I do about 510 grams because you always get a little bit of wastage and spillage. So, and again, it's normally the recipes usually say equal amounts, but it's like 250 grams of each. But what I do is 230 mils of water and 280 grams of flour. Cup. Don't forget to re-zero your scale. And in goes 280 grams of flour. 68. If you do a bit much, you can just pinch it out. 180. And then you mix this up. So that it's reasonably smooth consistency. Again, it's not absolutely critical that you get it perfectly smooth. It seems to even itself out over time. And then once you've mixed it, if you're wanting to make your sourdough every day, you can just put it in the cupboard and leave it until tomorrow. But if you're like me and you only make it every once or twice a week, then it's best to put it in the fridge, and that will just keep it ticking over quietly until the next time you want to make it. Okay, so that's basically it for the next half an hour.
Right.
We can go and sit down and do something else for half an hour.
I think a glass of wine.
Right.
Okay. Part 2. Hello.
Okay, so we let that rest for half an hour, which apparently allows the enzymes in the flour time to break things down or something. So just wet my fingers slightly, makes it a little bit easier to mix, and I'm going to add 15 grams of salt to this. Now it needs to be non-iodized, no caking agent, I think is the most important thing. Apparently it makes your loaf taste bitter if you've got caking agent in it. So we just very roughly mix that salt in. We can add a little bit more, and it can be rough as you like, just very quickly. It doesn't matter if you spill a little bit, and I'll just keep my hands a little bit wet at this stage, just because it helps to stop it sticking. Believe it or not, it sticks less when it's wet. So, and you can see it's sticking a little bit to the table at the moment, but if you keep it moving fast, you will find that it doesn't stick all that much. You don't need to flour the surface at all. You just keep working and thump it down. You give it a stretch. You don't sort of conventionally knead it like you do with a regular loaf. It's more a stretch and fold, and different people have different ways of doing it. This is kind of how I've developed it. Give it a bit of a thump, and keep it moving as fast as you can, and keep an eye on the time. It's just gone 7 o'clock in the evening, so you want to do this for about 4 minutes.
And this is a way shortened process from what they recommended.
Well, yeah, there's you can see some recipes call for this to be, you know, left to rise and prove, and come back to it and do it for 10 minutes, and then leave it another 10 minutes and come back and do it again, and then you leave it for 2 or 3 hours, and then you come and do it, and you just keep mucking around with it all day long. But I find that you don't need to do that. You still end up with a pretty reasonable loaf. It may not win any prizes, but I think it's pretty good.
It's beautiful.
Yeah. So,
And it looks as if it's kind of, something is happening to it now. It's looking
and
a
you can
little bit
see now
smoother.
it's a little bit smoother already. It starts to look like an old, clean, dry bone after a while, like an old sheep skull or something.
It's a bit of a workout.
Yeah, you can get a bit, yeah, it's a bit physical. Maybe I'm more physical than I need to be. Some people seem to be a bit more genteel with it. I don't know if you really have to thump it around like this, but I find it helps to give it a stretch. Got to work that gluten somehow.
It's a living thing, isn't it?
It is, yeah. Okay, well, it's coming up to the 4 minutes now, so what we need to do now, you see how that's a lot smoother and less sticky than it was. You just put down a very small amount of flour, and you can see it, just leaving it. See how it's stuck to the table even just in that short time I left it. But just thump it down onto there on the bottom, and then just, you need to stretch it out a little bit. You just fold over one end, and you fold the other end over it, and then you fold that end, and then the last one you fold it over like that. And again, some people say you have to, do this several times and go away and leave 10 minutes and come back and do it again and keep doing that, but you don't really need to. And then the last thing to do is just to kind of draw it along the table using the slight stickiness of the not very heavily floured bread on the non-floured table, and that just helps draw in the outer layer of it and helps develop the crust. Just put it back over, just where it's not quite so. Yeah.
That looks good.
Okay, so what we need to do now is get our rising bowl, which is we use an old stainless steel.
And this is a bit of paper that
bowl, and we have a bit of baking paper. And this is a little trick that we learned, that the easiest way of transferring and dealing with your loaf is to have it on a little bit of paper like that. And you just put it into there, like that. And now that just sits for a couple of hours. So again, we'll just
leave it there.
Leave it there, and we'll see it again in 2 hours.
And it's time for a glass of wine.
Another one.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, so it's now the morning, and we left it for 2 hours to prove and rise, and then we put it in the fridge overnight. And something I forgot to mention is that you need to have it covered during that proving stage and while it's in the fridge. You don't need to leave it in the fridge. You can just let it rise until it's reached a suitable height, and you can see what it looks like here. That might take as little as 2 hours, although if your starter is very new, very young, it might take 5 or 6 hours, and first time you do it you'll have to work out what your starter does, because they're all different. And as your starter gets older, you'll probably find it takes less and less time. But this is now ready to go in the oven. And so when we got up this morning, turned the oven on, got it up to maximum temperature, about 250 degrees Celsius, and we've put our Dutch oven, our big cast iron pot, in the oven to heat up. the only thing we need to do now, so that
Oh, now this is
nice and
what do you got
evenly,
there?
this is like a Stanley knife. You can use a razor blade, very sharp,
Okay.
any very sharp knife, and you have to just cut the surface. And then some little slices in the side as well.
And what does this do?
This just helps it so that when it rises, that crust splits and it doesn't split all unevenly, and it comes out looking a lot nicer if you do that. So we'll get our oven gloves and we'll get our pot out, and for this I'm going to need Annette's help.
Yeah, so I might have to shuffle with this a little bit, but
See how we go.
we'll see how we go.
Okay, right.
We tend to move fairly quickly. So take that over to
Take this
there.
over here, and then you want to grab your two corners. You probably need two corners. See how we go. Oh God.
Is that okay?
I think it's going to be okay. Good. Yep.
A little bit rough.
You can see it's already starting to puff up. And then that goes in the oven on 250 degrees for 20 minutes. So we'll come back in 20 minutes.
Time for another glass of wine?
Yes. Okay, so we've had 20 minutes. We'll just, now the first thing we need to do is turn the oven down. It needs to go to about 210 degrees, and everyone's oven is different. We find 220 degrees on our oven is 210 according to the oven thermometer. And then we need to take the lid off. If you're very clever, you can do this without taking it out of the oven, but that's how it looks at the moment. And so we just quickly put that back in. And that now gets another 30 minutes.
Jolly good. Done.
So 30 minutes have gone by and this is ready to come out.
What you got there?
There it is. That looks pretty good. So we'll just turn that out onto a rack.
Which we have already.
Just remove that paper. That paper can actually be reused if you're feeling really stingy. And there it is, and you can see that's come out really well. And it's got a nice, really well developed crust, which is why you do the business with keeping a lid on to let it rise with lots of steam and really hot to begin with, and then you take the lid off and that all just consolidates, and that will be ready to eat by lunchtime when it cooled down enough.
Yep.
Which is why we leave it overnight and do the baking first thing in the morning. But yeah,
Fabulous.
that should be really good.
Lunch.
And that's a loaf of sourdough.
Yay. Many cheers.